Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Ben Ormsby and I am the Yorkshire editor, and welcome to this Disruptors session on using data to fuel your transformation. Big data algorithms and AI are often more discussed than they are understood, but they can be transformational for businesses of all sizes, whether it's powering change and exponential progress or just making you realize the processes that you do. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to lift the lid on what impact data can have with regards to business, what's next in the world of data, and why it's at the heart of ensuring you and your business are ahead of the competition. This session will include a panel discussion, but before that, I caught up with David Richards, the founder and CEO of leading live data company WANdisco, which from its bases in both sunny Sheffield and Silicon Valley is working with global leaders to ensure businesses can use the latest data and machine learning technology to support their growth. To get his views on what's next for data and why it's crucial to the future of the North.
Thank you for joining us. Firstly, I guess we've introduced you as the co-founder and chief executive of WANdisco, with operations in both sunny Sheffield and in sort of Silicon Valley in America. You deal in large amounts of data and enabling businesses to harness that. What challenges did business face when they look to utilize sort of data in everyday life?
So yeah, it's great to be here. So there are many challenges associated with data and the utilization of data. So to take a step back, so we believe, many believe that data is the fundamental source and will be the fundamental source of competitive advantage across every industry in every single industry sector. So there are two aspects to it. One is collecting data. So one of our customers is in the automotive space, and it's going to be very hard for anybody to buy an insurance policy on an annualized basis moving forward, certainly in the next 5 years, because sensors are going to tell an insurance company how you drive. So just because you're 21 and you're trying to get an insurance policy for a Ferrari, who's to say that just because you're 50, you should be able to get an insurance policy to drive a Ferrari? Well, actually, data is going to tell an insurer what your risk profile is. So actuarial science is going to get turned on its head. So imagine what that means. That's like every single vehicle in the world. So the size of these markets is not sort of small provincial. This is going to disrupt absolutely everything. In the same way that Amazon did for retail, Google did for search. All these companies are big data companies. Now, the amount of data that we're now talking about is bigger than I ever expected. I mean, we're seeing demand to move an exabyte of data on premises to cloud per year. And this can only be coming from sensors, right? So we talked about IoT being a thing 15 years ago. Well, we didn't have a connected network like we do now with 5G coming, etc. So that's powering a new generation of companies with different sources of data and thus different sources of competitive advantage. So that's the data piece. That's complicated. How you get that amount of data from sensors on premises, from the edge into the cloud. And that's what WANdisco does actually. But then when you get it there, the algorithms that used to manipulate that data, artificial intelligence, more machine learning really today, they only really exist in the cloud. And companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon have been developing these things for years and years and years. So I would actually put it to everyone that it's one thing thinking about doing machine learning, anything from image recognition technology all the way through to voice recognition, Alexa, and so on, that's open source really with Amazon. All of this technology is available for free in the cloud. So the race really is, how do I get my data into the cloud so I can make some use of it? That's really the hard thing.
So you've touched on that all that software is available, and the challenge often with innovation is ensuring you're not left behind. So if you're not the first person to create it and use it, to be that early adopter who's still getting a competitive advantage. I guess what impact do you think embracing machine learning can have, and the big data can have on business growth moving forward?
I think it's going to be the fundamental source of it. I think the businesses that will succeed will be ones that are A, collecting their data, and B, using the best algorithms available to them. You can't use instinct, or you can't use what's happened before to make an adjudication about what's going to happen in the future. So big data's moved leaps and bounds in the last 10 years since WANdisco has been involved in the space. It used to be a look back, it used to be batch-based processing. So if you take a simple retail example, I'm going to look at what you purchased in the past and make a judgment about what you're going to buy in the future. Well, modern day analytics, machine learning, looks at what you are doing right now and makes a determination on what you are going to do next, right? And that is a fundamental difference to most retail. Most retail has information about what you've done in the past. That's not enough anymore. You have to understand what's going to happen in the future and make predictions using complex analytics, machine learning techniques in order to make those adjudications. And those adjudications come from not just the quality of your data set, but the quality of the algorithms that you're using.
And I guess there's always a lot of focus on, or it feels there's a lot of focus on data within the North, and that we've got this quality of data scientists and everything else. You know, how do we ensure that expertise is utilised commercially for the other businesses that are based here, but also that we remain at the forefront of that? You know, it must be a challenge for you with sites both, as we said, Sheffield and in the US. How do we keep the north of England competitive?
I don't want to go down the rat hole of education too much, but it has to start with education. So we just launched a project called AUP, EYUP. If you go to AUP.com, you'll see a load of courses on there and stuff. So we're going to churn out software engineers. We're going to teach people how to be software engineers. They're going to learn to code, but also become software engineers. And they're going to do that in 4 months. And they're all going to be employable. Every single one of them is going to get a job in 4 months. We're also going to take manufacturers and give them data science skills. So you can't just, it's very hard to take a data scientist and turn them into a manufacturer. It's incredibly easy, or easier, to take a manufacturer and give them data science techniques. It's unbelievably good. I'll give you a quick example. One of our customers is a very large telecommunications company in the United States. They did probably the biggest ever single movement of data to cloud. They moved about 15 petabytes of data on premises to the cloud. They went, and their data scientists are just people that they homegrown. They understand the business, you know, in telecommunications. They went from blocking 1 billion robocalls a year to blocking 1 billion robocalls per month by using those predictive analytical techniques. Now, in order to do that, it's not just data science. You actually have to understand the business. So we've got a plethora of people here in the north of England with a rich heritage, you know, my hometown of Sheffield, lots of manufacturers. If you arm them to the gills with these modern techniques, with machine learning, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, all of these things that are for free, it's amazing what can happen. It's truly, truly, truly amazing what could happen here. And it's really just giving people access. And it's lowering the barriers just a little bit and opening up this whole world, because most manufacturers don't even know that they're generating data. They won't even know it. So if you just show them sensor information, sensor data, how to store it in the cloud, and then how to start querying that data, you can do what that big telecommunications company did. By the way, that's saving them hundreds of millions of dollars in network utilization costs and so on. That's the effect it has. So if you were to compare that telecommunication company that just moved to the cloud, just moved to artificial intelligence and machine learning, and compared it to another one, and we know many of them have not yet done that, they're at a huge competitive disadvantage, humongous right now.
And I guess, well, you touched on it there. One of the challenges must be that communicating about big data and data in general to an audience that isn't data scientists. You know, how do you overcome that barrier? Perhaps, you know, you touched on it there. It's easier to train the manufacturer to understand big data than it is to teach the big data analyst to understand the manufacturing business.
It's hard. That's tough. What I sometimes do is I tell a story, and it was a study that was done at the University of California, UC Davis. And what they did is they got a bunch of pigeons to look at oncology examinations and make a determination whether they could detect malignant tumors in breast cancer. versus the top oncologists in the world. And a simple pigeon could get to, I think, 95, 96% accuracy. And then when they got them all together, and they sort of flock sourced, or they got all the pigeons together, they got to 99.8% accuracy, which is better than the best oncologist. Now, I put it to people, if you can train pigeons, recognize malignant tumors in breast cancer patients, I'm pretty sure you can train a machine to do this stuff much more accurately and much better. And that's just a fact that we have to accept as human beings. Computers have now got faster than the human brain. We have more storage than the human brain. So we don't try and run faster than a car or fly like an aeroplane. So why would we try and compete with these algorithms now? When you show people the outcome, not the theoretical, but the real business outcome, like the example I gave you, the telecommunications company blocking 1 billion robocalls, an extra 11 billion robocalls per year, that changes people's minds. Because we're not talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence and cloud computing and big data as some ethereal concept. It's actually the underpinnings for business. That's what it actually is. And it's a bit like a business that uses, some sort of abacus adding machine versus a business that's using a computer. It's that fundamental. And businesses that don't use it are unfortunately going to fail because they will not be able to keep up with businesses that do. And that's just a fact. That really is. So I'm worried for the region on one hand, because there isn't that much uptake in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Only a handful of companies are really doing it correctly. But on the other, I think there's a huge opportunity in the region. I mean, I know, for example, John Deere make tractors, right? They've got close to 10,000 software engineers. Their business is pivoting from really being an analog manufacturer to a digital manufacturer. And lots of companies are pivoting their business models from being essentially analog to pure digital. And they would rather charge for the software service than they would for, maintenance on resurfacing an engine or whatever. Those businesses are changing so quickly.
And that leads me on quite nicely. Obviously, WANdisco's sort of been going through a transition. Looking ahead, what are your unfulfilled ambitions, I guess, for WANdisco? And how do you want to play a part in that evolving economy?
Oh, so we want to be right at the very heart of it. So I think you're going to see us prove that the pipeline that takes data from edge, from all these sensors and devices at scale and moves it to the cloud, we want to be that company. Nobody else. I mean, we want to be the de facto standard for doing that. And I think we're well on the, we've been through lots of changes as the market's pivoted and changed. Most people thought it was going to be data centers in companies were going to host their own data in their own data centers. Then 3 or 4 years ago, that completely changed and everything's going to go to the cloud. And luckily for us, well, not luckily because we planned it, we were completely in the right place at the right time for that movement. So as data moves at scale from the edge to the cloud, we really want to be the company that's doing not just some of it, but all of that data movement.
And then the other one's got to be, what's next? You've touched on the fact that there's sensors everywhere and there's only going to be increasing amounts. So what is the next big area in big data and that?
Well, companies are not going to put all their eggs into one basket as they have done in the past. For example, with classic is the Oracle database. So companies are going to move and arbitrage between clouds. So really what cloud is utility computing. It's the when I want to plug in a device, I just plug it in and consume electricity from the electrical company. That's really what cloud is for data processing. So I need to be able to shift between cloud vendors as easy as it is to shift between my electrical supplier. And that really is something that WANdisco, we're thinking very carefully about. How do we ensure that customers' data is liberated to the point where they can shift between an arbitrage almost between clouds? So I believe that there's going to be a spot market like there is an oil futures market, that there will be a compute market where if I want to pre-buy computer processing power, because it's going to be the fundamental source in my company of competitive advantage, I need to make sure that cost is at the lowest possible point it can be, because I'm going to be using so much of it. So it's really, people thought data was the new oil. Actually, compute power, computation is the new oil. So there's going to be spot markets that appear. So you need to be able to move your data to wherever it's at the most cost efficient point. So that's really where I think that's the future. I think that's where we're going to be headstrong moving into, certainly in the next 10 years.
It's a fascinating realm, and I think we'll all be watching what WANdisco is doing moving forward, but also seeing how those other businesses can do. And A-Up is a great initiative, and hopefully we can train the next generation of that talent to come through and help the North's manufacturers and all businesses to keep going into the 21st century and beyond.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much, David. So that allows me to bring on our panel, where we're going to go and discuss some of these topics in a bit more detail and about the opportunities in particular they provide. So hopefully my fellow panelists will be joining me now. And as if by magic, it's always a good sign when the technology works. And so I'm going to start by asking you each to introduce yourself very succinctly and provide a view of, well, what opportunities do you think data provides to businesses? Being very succinct, please, if possible. And I will start. I'm going to go from my right, which makes it Steve Pimblett first, please.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm Steve Pimblett. I'm Chief Data Officer at the Very Group. So what does data mean for Very? Well, succinctly, we agree with David, really, from that previous dialogue, which is it is a competitive advantage. So Very are an online retailer, are a financial services, credit business. We've got an automated robotic warehouse, and we believe all our business units can benefit from a data and an insight strategy that gives them competitive advantage in their own business model. And I'll hand it back so you can tag somebody else.
We'll keep going on that line. So Daniel.
Hi, I'm Dan Graham. I'm the CTO of 247 Group, which is car finance 247 and 24/7 Money in the main. Data for us, really underpins everything. So, we're one of the largest car finance brokers in the country. We deal with more people, we have more communications. Having accurate insights into that data, driving insights, allows us to be more operationally efficient, allows us to optimize our flows, work out when the right time to speak to people is. And really, we're on that journey of tapping into what data can tell us. It helps us with risk modeling. It's everything, really. We sit around a table and we can't answer a question really about the business anymore without looking at the data.
Going down then to Charlotte next. I could see her nodding along and smiling as you said you can't answer a question without data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Charlotte Bailey and I'm the COO for PanIntelligence. For those that aren't familiar with us, we are a 3-in-1 embedded BI tool for dashboarding, reporting and predictive analytics. So we provide the software that helps drive the insight out of data. I use data though every day, like Daniel says, I use it to inform and improve decision making. It's helped provide clarity and confidence against that decision making as well. It helps businesses become more proactive. I've used data to revamp and refine our operations. So I use it aligned to processes to inform customer journeys and our own business flows. We use it to boost customer acquisition and drive retention. And the reason for that is because we do now have a single customer view. We look at all of that data and look for the commonalities. And like everybody's said so far, it's also helped provide us with a competitive advantage. Understanding the data you've got and understanding your customers' data drives change. And that's why it's so important.
Perfect. And lastly to you, Steve Caughey, please.
So I'm Steve Caughey. I'm the director of the National Innovation Centre for Data based in Newcastle. And what we're about is helping organizations to get some of those skills that we were speaking about earlier to help people get insight from their data. And the thing that we see is that so much of innovation that's happening in every sector is happening digitally. And underlying any of that innovation in digital is data. And if you don't fully understand your data, you'll struggle to innovate. So we think that the big proof is getting the skills that will let you then go out and innovate with your customers and your clients.
Fantastic. So just for the audience, if you do have any questions for our panel, please put them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll put them to the panel as we go. But you've all sort of just clearly said data is the bee's knees and it's at the heart of everything and decision making. Well, how can businesses start to capitalize on that? I guess, as David said in his intro, businesses aren't always aware of the amount of data they get. So how do you start that journey? Perhaps Daniel, you touched on that. It's now become such a crux of your business. How did you start that journey?
Well, I think everyone starts a journey, or everyone starts building a business, and we'll start with really simple models. So they'll start with Excel or paper or cards. People manage businesses like that, and as they grow up to scale, you outgrow Excel. In the old days, you'd outgrow 65,000 rows, and now you can do a little bit more. So people still stay in Excel for a little bit too longer, but then they'll go into a database, and then they can do reports and queries, and it's great. But then really you're kind of limited by your skill and your data storage. So people then have data warehouses and all the new funky data lakes and data meshes. But really the key thing is to actually understand what data you're generating and why you're generating it, and sort of align it and engineer it so it's consistent, because then you can start to understand it. There's no point having data off in little silos that is unrelated, and you can't join it all up together. So really it's about getting the data into a position where you can actually start to analyze it. That's how you start on this journey. And then you can look at what the tools and tricks are to actually get the most out of it. Because, in a slight disagreement with the previous sort of speaker, you don't have to put it into the cloud. Machine learning is available on a modern laptop. The software you'll be running in the cloud will basically be the same Python libraries that are nicely optimized, sort of machine learning, sort of execution. You might want to use the cloud for model building because there's more compute resource there, but you can run your models in real time on a bloody Raspberry Pi if you want to. Sorry for the language. And so really it's about understanding the data in the first place. You've got to do that. You need to have people who are prepared to analyze the data. As Charlotte said, you need a kind of analysis phase, and that's where you start. You need to know you've got a data problem and want to get the data into a state where you can actually start to look at it. And then when you've got the data there, then you can start applying the more advanced techniques. So see if you can draw a straight line through it before you decide where the other dimensions are, if you like.
And I guess, Steve, you touched on it, that it's at the heart of the Very Group's business. Steve Pimblett, sorry, I realised there's two Steves. I'm going to have to remember to surname you all. Steve Pimblett, you touched on it, it's the heart of the Very Group's sort of strategy and knowing and everything and looking at that. How do you bring together what I imagine is a vast amount of data and make sense of it? Is there a big group of data scientists now?
Yeah. So I run a team of 150 people. About 20 of them are data scientists. But everything from engineering to business intelligence to advanced analytics. So yeah, a big team and a big remit. I think joining the dots, we've got 4 pillars to our data strategy. Data, insight, action is that flow of value that maybe we're talking about. You take data, you're going to translate it into insight. And then our final pillars, well, what actions are we taking on it? And it's all underpinned by a trust framework. For me, without answering the question technically, actually, it's about joining it to the business outcome. So very much getting the business to want to answer questions about actionable insights. So where do we make all our margin? Which suppliers give us the best return? Where's the biggest fraud created? What's the unit cost of every item stored in our warehouse? Which customers have got the best long-term value that we can offer the best deals to? So very much, data, insight, action. And the action piece is fundamental, because for me, that's where the business engage with the insight and the data that you need to answer their business questions.
On that point, Ben, sorry, I just think I completely agree with everything you say, Steve. And it all sounds incredibly grand. And, the Very Group, you're huge, it's incredible. But smaller companies can also derive actionable insights and don't need a data strategy to do that. I encounter many organizations that have an understanding that they need to make better business decisions. And actually the way that they've approached it is they're identifying and prioritizing unanswered business questions. And actually that's very similar to the Very Group in that respect. So, people shouldn't be scared about the sort of terms data scientist, data strategy, and all of these sort of larger phrases. anybody can start driving insight. They just need to start asking the questions that they'd like to get an answer from, using data to frame that.
Yeah,
You almost read my mind there, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think some of the previous companies, a startup, so very much, not quite the budget that we've got at Very, or the team size. Yeah, and everywhere I've been, I coined the phrase "leading with insight," and that's what you're talking about. Is you've got a hypothesis, you normally need data to prove it or disprove it. So if you can get the company being hypotheses driven, which I think is what you're describing, then it doesn't matter whether it's, the biggest cloud in the world with the biggest compute, or in a PC with a bit of data and some logic. It's that dynamic of leading with insight.
Absolutely.
Steve Caughey, you're clearly coming at it from the fact that data is the backbone, perhaps, for innovation. For businesses that might be looking to start that innovation journey, well, where do you think they start? And perhaps data isn't something new. So what's changed that's made it possible to unlock this potential that seems to be never ending? If I believe everything that you guys have said to me and David said to me on that call earlier.
So just answering your last question, the thing that's changed is scale, right? We now have the cloud that can crunch enough data. We have sensors that are cheap enough to gather data. We have a network that's powerful enough to exchange data. That's what's driven the exponential change in the use of data. But when it comes to encouraging organizations to do more with their data, the thing that we find with all sizes of organizations is an awareness that they're not using their data correctly. They're not getting everything out of it they might. They're gathering quite a lot of it, right? But they're very aware they're only scratching the surface of it. So the thing that we try to do is overcome the management reluctance to invest in data by picking low-hanging fruit inside the organization, by going in and solving a real problem, but solving it with our team, working alongside the people in the organization to prove to the management team the value in investing in this space. Most management teams because this has happened so quickly, they don't have the right knowledge to make the right buying and hiring decisions around data. I mean, setting a data strategy for most of these guys is just impossible because they have no sense at all of what data is about. So if you go in and actually show them, here's how to understand the language, here's the sorts of skills you're going to need, and here's the value that you can return, then we find that's the best way to drive organizations to increasingly utilize their data.
I've got to ask the question then, with more businesses starting to embrace data in all its forms, what common mistakes do businesses make when they start that journey? Is there, and have you got any advice for how to avoid them? Charlotte, you're nodding, so I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I think the first one is accuracy. So just because a decision's based on data doesn't necessarily mean it'll always be correct. Data might show patterns or certain outcomes, but if the data collection process itself is flawed, then that decision itself will be inaccurate. So question the validity of the data, invest in measuring and monitoring data quality. That's quite important. I think there's another one. Analysis paralysis is what we call it. So analyzing data without a goal. Lots of organizations jump straight into these data initiatives, and there's an overwhelming volume of data collection, and that inevitably leads to stalled projects and paralysis. So if you're going to jump into the world of big data, start with small, well-defined initiatives. Don't try and eat the elephant. And then I think finally, failing to understand the value of data is also somewhere that people tend to be falling down. So data is valuable to an organization if every employee knows how to harness it. So it's not enough just to have the tools or hundreds of employees to work on them if people in general don't understand what data is being produced, how it's being produced, how to responsibly handle that data, and then how to use that data to understand the company better. And if you fail to understand the value of that data, then you're not going to drive the insight that you probably hoped for.
Firstly, I've just got the article headline now of "Don't Eat the Elephant" for the write-up after this session, because I'm never going to get the chance to use it otherwise. But the thing that you said there that struck me, and it's Steve Caughey mentioned it as well, was making sure your people understand it and can know how to engage with it. How much of a challenge is getting people up to speed within an organization? And how do we get better at doing that? Perhaps in the north, we have an abundance of universities. Is this something that we can do already, or is there work already going on?
I think firstly, we don't need to assume that everybody needs to become a data scientist to be able to understand data. The rise in analytical tools that offer a no-code or a low-code basis is creating the rise of citizen developers. So for people that don't understand the term citizen developer, they're the domain experts. They're the people doing their job day in, day out that really understand the mechanics of the data. So how difficult is it for people to get their head around data? Probably not as hard as you think. What they use are these BI tools to validate their understanding, to back their thinking. Gone are the days where gut instinct's good enough. People want concrete decisions. So I don't think it's difficult. I think people just have to consider, how can I validate my understanding? How can I back my decisions? And how can I generate insight that perhaps I haven't capitalized on before?
I'd sort of agree, Charlotte, but I wouldn't underestimate how hard it is to change a cultural organisation that is based on people who have their own cottage industries within the business itself. They've got their own ways of doing it, their own little reporting lines and little collections and little mini spreadsheets that they use to backdoor data around and make all their own decisions. And don't underestimate how hard it is to get those people to start looking at like a correctly aggregated report versus what their top 3 salesperson told them, over a beer on a Friday night. That stuff is absolutely rife at businesses of any scale, and that's all the way up to big financial institutions down to small sort of cottage industries. It's very, very difficult to unravel that.
Completely.
Yeah.
And you're a highly rational person who's an expert in data, so you think, you've got a nicely principled approach. Most people don't. They'll look at 3 days data and go, yeah, it's that. Bang, and then turns to be something else.
I think it comes back to change management and creating that compelling case for change. What are the benefits? What's the value proposition of bringing something in or operating in a slightly different way, and how can you bring somebody on that journey? But no, I completely agree, Daniel, and I've seen many organizations fail because they haven't brought their team on that journey.
Yeah, we call it very top trumps is what we call it. So everyone turns up for a meeting and they've all got their own private stash of KPIs that they roll out. So like Charlotte said before, actually, it's like, where does that actually come from? What's the source? And the minute you start to challenge them, actually, it's not a lot of people that know where it come from. They'll just say Bob. Well, where does Bob get it from? So you've got that. And then, the cultural change is a big part of that, the change agenda. So, we've developed a model to better predict what stock we should have for certain lines. And we've got hundreds of thousands of them. But actually, Mary, whose job it was to buy kettles for the last 10 years, that's now got a model that, she can leverage. It's difficult to bring everybody on that journey. So there's a big part of cultural change, data literacy, education, and definitely business and cultural change.
And so we also find that if you're trying to make this cultural change, trying to drive it from the top down is generally doomed to failure because the people at the top don't understand what they're trying to achieve. But freeing up people down at the coalface, giving them the time and encourage them to innovate and explore and then communicate the things they're learning. We've seen a number of companies do that, and that's been very successful. You then hold those people up as exemplars of they've achieved something really significant using data. You clap them on the back, you show everybody else how important that is, and that encourages more people to join in.
Yeah, definitely. We green with envy. That's what we try to do. Make heroes of people, and that's definitely a great strategy we find. Which is, there's a buyer in one of our category divisions who's got a perfect record now with regards to stock outs. Why? Because they partnered with us on the algorithms. They've been leaning into it, and actually they're now a shining example, and everybody's starting to follow. Definitely there's a big part for EQ, not just the IQ of data science.
It ties slightly into the question that just came from Mark on the chat, which was, data is often described as objective, whereas analysis can be subjective. How do you guard against just using that data to justify your end, or justify what you're going to do either way? I guess probably that's the education piece you guys were talking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, recently we've gone through an exercise again, and we do this periodically, but this one had sort of real teeth to it, where we actually got all the sort of senior decision makers in a room and got them to agree on the key business metrics that drive our process. And there were some really quite interesting discussions about, for example, what is a completed deal. And you think we've been running for 10 years, we'd know by now. So it's quite interesting. And one of those figures can be, on one side of the equation, can be a headline sales number, part of the whole department monthly target, and one of them can be, how many things actually transacted. And when you've got a disagreement between those two, then the financial modelling becomes a little bit woolly, shall we say? So that's a really simple example, but that's an obvious one, but to sort of iron out. But there's others in the middle, what does an interested customer look like? How do you actually define that? Has he or she done a certain action? Is it that binary, or is it more of a statistical measure of like a customer's behavior? These teasing out these metrics so that everyone agrees what they are, then you can't argue with them. That stops you going off and creating your own little mini cottage industry under your own team, in your own little departments, busy building Excel spreadsheets, manually grabbing data left, right, and centre from all other sorts of sources. That's what works, I think, for us, and that's what gives clarity.
Obviously, retail, both with Steve P and Dan is sort of gives that example. Charlotte, Steve C, I guess, how are you seeing that data be utilised in other industries as well? Like, the manufacturing sector seems like one of those ones that occasionally can be quite difficult to engage with when it's talking technology, if it's not a big machine to make something go faster. That might be doing a bit of disservice to some parts of the sector there, but you know what I'm getting at. So I guess how do you try and engage those, and what opportunities do you see for them?
So it is all about opportunity. So we've got a partner that we work with called Every Angle, and they are a camera device company who saw an opportunity in COVID to be able to use data to promote and encourage social distancing in retail stores. So they use data to be able to manage distancing between visual representations to make sure that shops could have the right number of people in the stores to maintain social distancing. They created alerting systems at the entry of retail premises to make sure only a certain amount of people could come in, and then they had a green and light traffic light system. Pre-COVID, they were a device company. So there's always opportunity. Understanding what business problems they're trying to solve is probably the biggest challenge, and then using data to support that.
So we do find that dealing with manufacturing businesses is quite difficult. They work in a particular way. They have their existing processes. They know what they're doing, and they have a strong resistance to people coming in and telling them how to change it. The areas where we do see some progress are around things like predictive maintenance, resource management, also machine vision in factories and so on to detect faults and so on. So there are areas where we're beginning to see movement, but there's definitely a cultural barrier in manufacturing compared to many other sectors.
So I guess that leads me nicely to a degree on, and I'm going to hold you to this. I promise that in 10 years' time, if none of this comes true, I'm going to come and knock on your doors and we're going to have it out. But what's next, and how do businesses prepare? What is it, perhaps Steve P, that you're thinking? Maybe don't give any corporate secrets away, because I don't want to be told off by a various PR team later. But what is it that you guys are focused on and trying to prepare for within regards to that data movement?
Yeah, so I suppose our overall data maturity model, so and scaling that up, which is a lot of what we talked about, whether it's getting better with advanced analytics, machine learning, whether it's educating all staff on data literacy. So just a general maturity model for the company. That's a massive focus for us. And then it's actually back to, your data strategy isn't your business strategy, it's in support of your business strategy. So it really does depend upon the company where they think that they can leverage the value from. Very is a big, B2C brand. So a lot of the innovation goes into, the consumer proposition, be it, cross-sell, upsell, personalization, recommendations, the use of augmented reality, chatbots. There's loads of initiatives that leverage data. I think it's about for me, it's about joining the data competency and maturity model to the business strategy. Those aren't two separate things. They need to be joined.
Fantastic. I guess, Steve C., same question to you. What is it the Innovation Centre for Data you're looking at and seeing as the next big thing, and how do we prepare for it?
So two quick answers to that. So one is, I think longer term, it's all about real-time data. It's about responding quicker to your clients and your customers and being able to do it ahead of your competition. Any advantage you have there will help you win. But actually, when we talk to most of our customers, we don't talk about AI and we don't talk about future casing. We talk about giving them a better spreadsheet. Right, most people are doing stuff with their data not right now. If you can incrementally improve what they're doing and show them those benefits, right down in the weeds, move them from a spreadsheet to a simple database, for example. That can produce huge benefits for organizations. So we try to focus on the real world rather than looking too far out over the horizon.
Daniel, same one to you.
Yeah, I think I could follow on from Steve's there. Yeah, not everything needs big data. Not everything needs the cloud. Just getting your data in the right shape, having the right sort of baseline for your data universe, however big or small it may be, is really important to me. Things like engineering data capture into the right points of the whole process, not just financial end of month or end of period reporting. Yeah, getting it all real time, making real time decisions. And then I thought I was quite encouraged by Steve P saying, looking at things like chatbots and so on, very huge. Obviously, we do our customer sort of communications on those sort of on a platform that supports all of this, but we haven't really had time to sit and think about what chatbots we want to train yet, because we're not quite sure where we'd put them in which part of the journey. And that, having the data and the right touch points and clear definitions helps you identify where you want to fill the gaps. We're great when we're speaking to people on the phone. We're not great overnight. Really simple things like that. So what do we do better? And we've just extended a certain partial opening hours because we think customers actually want to book callbacks to speak to them, after they get home from work, not during business hours. Really, really simple things like that provide key operational insights for your business. And I think the vast majority of businesses are at that end of the scale, not at the state of the art machine learning, pattern recognition, computer vision. They're problems for very, very small niche industries or very, very large industries like Amazon. You just don't need to do that. Most people are sitting very comfortably, and I think that's what's good about the North, where I think we said earlier, we started off as manufacturing. Now we've got hundreds of little industries all swarming around the city centre, learning as a community and pushing forward. And I think that's very exciting, watching the North develop in that way, as opposed to the kind of centralised bank sort of focus of London.
That's going in as a quote. Perfect quotable answer about why the North's so great. Charlotte, bring us home. You answered the same question. What's next? How can we prepare?
Yeah, so thank you, everyone. You've finished my examples, but I think there's two that we've not really covered. So one is ways to analyze data will continually improve, and we'll see a rise in self-service data prep becoming a bit more mainstream, and end users will begin to sort of shape big data. So there will be this education, knowledge transfer that makes data a bit more accessible for everybody. In doing that, though, I think data of all sorts are still going to face some huge challenges around privacy. And if there's one takeaway from sort of thinking about data in your data strategy, there is a security skill gap in organizations at the moment that really understands, the implications of using data, the application of data standards and things like that. And, with maturity of technology, we'll also see, unfortunately, an evolution of things like cyber attacks. So how do you stay safe? How do we make sure that people understand what data protection mechanisms they've got on their estate and how to improve that. So yes, security should always be at the forefront of anybody's mind when thinking about data. And on that bombshell of a note and talking cybersecurity, I'll bring us to an end. Thank you very much for joining this session. I hope you've all found it interesting, as I certainly have, and that you'll be staying around for some of the other panel discussions over Disruptors North for the rest of the afternoon. Next up at 2 p.m, there are 2 sessions focused on talent and developing a workforce for tech-enabled economy, hosted by my colleague, Shalina Begum. I hope to see you there, and if not, I will be in the networking area and look forward to speaking to you all later. Thank you very much.